Hey guys, alright, today we will be watching, or well, continuing, Oversimplified's World War One, Part 2. Part 2? Let's see, where did we leave off in the first one? It's been, honestly, a while since I watched, since I reacted to that first episode. I forget. Did we only get to 1914? Or did we get halfway through the war? Anyways, it doesn't matter. Let's go ahead and start watching part 2.
With both sides stuck in a hard stalemate, they knew this war wasn't going to be about taking territory, but about simply wearing each other down.
Yes. Yeah. It was, or well, not at first. Initially, it was like, alright, quick victory. Let's get this over with. At least that was the German plan. That did not happen. It turned in around 1915, 1960 is when they changed, like, all right, just wear each other the fuck out.
The Allies had plenty of men to expend from its overseas
Mainly the British Raj.
dominions. And the British also started a naval blockade, so Germany couldn't import stuff, like food. Neither side really
They show a burger and fries.
wanted a long grueling war then, so they both thought of ways to break the deadlock on the Western Front. Idea number 1, new frontiers. When the war first broke out, Australia was quick to take German New Guinea. The Allies also quickly jumped on Germany's colonies in Africa, and particularly in German East Africa, locals were enlisted as soldiers and carriers by both sides, leading to a tragic loss of life for the native Africans.
Yeah.
Some new combatants entered the war as well.
I really like that he does that now and then in a lot of his videos. Is he doesn't go into too much depth, obviously because he's oversimplified, but he does still bring light to the lesser known conflicts like that in Africa, which we did get a little bit of a discussion in Epic History's World War I video. But for instance, in like American classrooms, I don't know what it's like in European classrooms or Asian classrooms, etc. I don't know what it's like there. But at least what I can say for American classrooms when we're taught World War I, you're kind of really taught mainly European, or if you're taught something, it's usually where American interests or American soldiers were. You're not really taught much outside of what is where American soldiers were. I think is a decent way of explaining it. But mainly where American activities would be more easily found is kind of where then American classrooms kind of teach, right? Because like you're not really taught the islands. For example, I'll give an example here. You're not really taught much about the conflicts in the more southern Pacific islands that are like located like New Guinea and such. You're not taught about those in World War II because that was mainly British, Australian, and like New Zealander conflicts, right, against the Japanese. But you are taught Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and then obviously the Philippines and such, because that's where American soldiers were to be found in larger numbers for the conflict. Kind of see that in World War I as well. You're taught the Western Front. You're mentioned, the Eastern Front's mentioned, but it's quickly dropped. It's mentioned in passing. And then like you're never really talked about the African colonies, which you get in American classrooms is like, oh, yeah, Germany had some African colonies. The British took them. The end. Okay. You're not taught the ins and outs, like Oversimplified here just briefly mentioned.
The Allies' new friends were Italy and Japan. Japan was busy building itself an empire, so it was more than happy to take away German islands and colonies in East Asia.
Yeah.
Italy actually had an alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary before the war, but after some tense relations, and then the Allies promising to give them some of Austria-Hungary's stuff, they switched sides.
Yeah, they
Italy
did
opened
that.
up a front in the mountains here, but like everyone else, they were stuck in stalemate for most of the war. The Central Powers' new friend was a struggling empire in the Middle East. The Ottomans were divided on whether to actually join the war or not, since they had been exhausted by the recent Balkan Wars. Some of the politicians
Yeah.
who did want to join went off on their own and fired some shells at Russia, and then came back and said, "Whoops, looks like we're at war now." The Ottoman
Wait,
entry into
really?
the war was of particular concern.
Okay, I didn't know the Ottomans were that split, and I didn't know that, like, I guess a rogue government group that were pro-war went and just, attacked a
to
country.
the British, since the Middle East was full of oil, and Britain wanted all of that oil. First, the Ottomans tried
Yeah.
to attack Russia in the Caucasus Mountains, but they weren't prepared for the cold, and many of them froze to death. Then they
Oof.
crossed miles of desert to take the Suez Canal from the British, but that failed too. Then the Allies tried to take the Dardanelles at Gallipoli in a long and hard trench warfare campaign, but that also failed. The Ottomans blamed their
The
initial
one time
losses
the Ottoman army did good, Gallipoli.
on the ethnic
Obviously
Armenians living
oversimplified.
within Ottoman territory, and the resulting Armenian genocide led to the deaths of 1.5 million people.
Wow.
Then the
I didn't expect to get into the Armenian genocide that quickly into the video.
Germans sent spies into Afghanistan to try to convince the Arab tribes there to rise up in jihad against the British and attack India. But that plan failed, partly because the spies got bored, brewed their own alcohol, and got drunk, which is a bad thing to do in Afghanistan. All these new
Yeah,
frontiers hadn't done much
it
to
is.
change the war. Aware that the Allies had more men and supplies
At least for Westerners it's bad. I don't know
than them, the Germans knew
about
they
locals.
had to do something to break
how
the
bad it is for
stalemate.
locals back then.
Before the war, there was a big conference that set out the rules of modern warfare. No chemical weapons, no killing civilians. Basically, don't be jerks. The Germans held a meeting and decided to be jerks. Zeppelin air raids commenced over British cities. They also started attacking the Allied trenches with chlorine gas.
Is this World War I footage? But this looks more like... Huh. This kind of looks like, I think there was an image of the Gulf War where Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons against the Iranians, right? This kind of looks like it. I think that's what I'm thinking of.
And they used
I'm not sure.
submarines to sink civilian ships. One such civilian ship was the Lusitania, which had 159 Americans on board when it was sunk, further swaying U.S. opinion against the Germans.
Someone's about to
Not
get
be
liberated.
completely unfair to the Germans, the Allies also engaged in chemical warfare soon after, and they had been hiding anti-submarine weapons on their civilian ships, which let the Germans justify their attacks. Meanwhile, Austria-Hungary still hadn't dealt with Serbia, so the Central Powers enlisted some help. Bulgaria wished it was bigger and was still bitter about losing the Second Balkan War. The Central Powers promised to make all of Bulgaria's wildest dreams come true if they helped, so they signed on, and together they knocked out Serbia. The Serbian troops retreated through Albania, which was neutral but had some ties to Austria-Hungary. So Austria-Hungary entered Albania in a friendly invasion to chase down the Serbians.
You know, there are invasions where they're totally unfriendly, right? Right? Those exist. Those exist.
Many of whom escaped by sea. It's 1916, and a lot is happening. As if they
That's one
didn't
way
have
to
enough
put it.
enemies already, Germany added one more to the list. Portugal had been getting a bit chummy with the Allies behind the scenes, and Germany didn't like that one bit. Around the same time,
Hey, you friends with this guy? Alright, screw you. Let's go to war. Let's fight.
the only sea battle of the war happened. Both sides had a new powerful class of battleships called dreadnoughts, but they were so expensive to build that neither side wanted to risk losing them in a battle. So they kept them in port, except for one time when they had a big fight and a bunch of them got damaged, so they didn't try that again.
Yeah.
They started conscripting men to the army, so they had plenty of reserves, which is just as well because the Western Front was about to get brutal. The longest and one of the bloodiest battles of the war started when the Germans launched an attack around the French city of Verdun. The French defended it desperately, leading to hundreds of thousands of casualties. Under pressure, the French called on its allies to do something to draw the Germans' attention away, so the British started their own long and brutal fight, the Battle of the Somme, with 60,000 British casualties on just the first day. It was also here that the British first used one crazy brand new piece of sci-fi technology. The
Sci-fi?
Russians had been getting pushed back further and further into their own territory, but in response to the French call for help, they began a huge offensive, and did really well until they ran out of supplies and got stuck. Seeing how well the Russians had been doing, Romania decided now would be a great time to jump in and win the war, and then they got pounded. The Greeks were fighting amongst themselves about whether to join the war or not. The king liked the Central Powers, while the Prime Minister wanted to join the Allies. After a brief national schism, during which the country split into two, the king finally abdicated and the country reunited.
Huh.
With Allied help, they began a new offensive. In the Middle East, Russia was pushing into Ottoman territory from the north. The British had also made a landing in Mesopotamia to protect Persia's oil fields, and they had also sent a small army up the Tigris River to try to take Baghdad, but the army got sieged in the town of Kut along the way, and eventually surrendered. a new offensive was launched from the south with all-out desert warfare. The offensive was aided by one famous British officer, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, who helped lead the Arab tribes in a revolt that wreaked havoc on the Ottoman supply lines. By the time 1917 rolled around, everyone
I love
was
his
exhausted.
animations.
There were mutinies in the French army, the German populace was starving, and the war had drained all of Russia's supplies. There was no clear winner, and it was still anyone's war. The only question now was, who was going to break first? And the answer was Russia. Tired of not eating and mad that a crazy magic homeless guy was calling some of the shots, there was an uprising in Petrograd complete with riots and strikes. The riots turned into a full-scale revolution, and a new government overthrew the Tsar. Then a few months later, the Bolsheviks overthrew the new government, and they pulled Russia out of the war. This was great news for Germany.
God, it's so amazing to see that, like, what was this? This video is a few years old now, and how, like, he just spent, like, what, 10 seconds discussing the Russian Revolution. And now today, he has 2 videos in which he spends, like, 50 minutes talking about the Russian Revolution. Like, man, talk about a glow up.
Who now only had to focus on the Western Front, but there was still one problem. The pesky United States of America was looking increasingly like it was going to join the war. America had been selling supplies to the Allies throughout the war and was getting super rich off the back of it, meaning it was in fantastic shape and was dangerous to the Germans. So Germany sent a telegram to Mexico saying, wouldn't it be crazy cool if you guys attacked America?
To be fair, though, let's also mention this. America would have sold those same supplies to the German Empire if the British weren't sinking, or if the British weren't putting up a blockade. Like, let's be real, that's what America would do. Like, and I think in the beginning of the war, I think America was selling to both sides. So, you know.
But the British intercepted the message, showed it to the Americans, and
I still love the theory that the British faked the message. I don't know how true it is. I just remember I've read that before. But I think it's kind of a funny thing to think about if, like, America got involved in the war because the British lied or something. That'd be interesting.
American troops began shipping.
If, like, I don't know. Sorry to pause so much. I'm going off on a tangent here because it just came in my. Imagine like a story thread or like an alternate history thread where it is confirmed that the British faked the Zimmerman telegram, and the Americans found out that the British lied to them. How that would change things, if that would change anything at all. That to me seems interesting.
Out to Europe. This was terrible news for Germany, and they knew their only hope now was to force France and the UK to surrender before the fresh American troops arrived. It was now or never, so they started one final attack. They converged their troops and hit hard at the Somme and pushed the Allies back. They hit a second time further north, then again and again. With each hit, the Germans were spending more and more resources, while the Allies were getting better and better at repelling their attacks. By the 5th punch, the Allies held the line and even pushed back. With American troops now arriving in larger numbers, the Allies launched a counterattack, and that was it. The Central Powers were being pushed back on all fronts. Bulgaria collapsed first, followed by the Ottoman Empire, then Austria-Hungary, and finally on November 11, 1918, at 11 o'clock, Germany surrendered. At the peace treaty, Germany was forced to reduce its military, accept war guilt, and pay the bill for the war.
Shout the mullah.
Suffering and millions dead, the world learnt its lesson and never had such an awful war again. For about 20 years.
Yeah, and then the world learned its lesson a second time. It would never have a war for ever, right? Right? World War II is the last war, right? Right? Well, it would be the last war in which the world's powers would directly fight each other. World War II. Yeah. Good video. Good video. I do love Oversimplified. His videos are like just like the right length, and he talks about just enough stuff to where I can actually provide good commentary over, or at least add some little bits of information here and there. Unlike, you know, Epic History TV, who has their stuff like they go in depth, and then it's hard for me to like really add upon what they say because they're so thorough. And recent Oversimplified videos have also started becoming like that, like with the Russian Revolution video. That one, he I don't know if he really is oversimplified that much anymore. He's pretty explanatory nowadays. But yeah, that was World War I Oversimplified Part 2. I hope you guys enjoyed. I think the next Oversimplified video is going to be the French Revolution. I think that's the next episode. Or, well, not next video, but like the next oversimplified video for me to watch when I get to it. Well, when I get through the current queue of videos that I've got. Anyways, enough tangent. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Remember to leave a suggestion down below for what you'd like to see me react to next. As always, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Have a good day. Thank you.